activities now. As a student of the Dharma, I am on the board of the Minnesota Multi-Faith Network, and I also do a lot of work with Isaiah and Faith in Minnesota on legislative responses to having a genuinely multicultural democracy, a caring economy, and a just climate future. I've also been a religious resource volunteer for the past 2 decades for the Department of Corrections in Minnesota, offering mindfulness in correctional facilities. And that's been a big part of my practice. I've learned a lot from the wisdom and generosity of the people who are currently incarcerated, the nobility of many people who are incarcerated right now. So I want to begin with a land acknowledgement. Common ground here physically is sited on the traditional, ancestral, do a little adjustment here. Common ground is sited on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary homelands of the Dakota people. And this land, actually, where we are in Minnesota, holds great historical, spiritual, and personal significance to the original inhabitants and their descendants who live here today, and to their future generations. And many of you know that at the confluence of the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers is the Bdote, which for the Dakota people is the site of creation. It's the most sacred place. And historically, many Dakota women, if it was possible, would travel to the Bdote so that their children would see the sunrise the way the first people saw it. It is an incredibly sacred site. And we want to acknowledge the sovereignty of Native nations and our obligations to live up to our treaty agreements. It is our intention to rectify the harms that we have committed and that we continue to commit. This land acknowledgement is only one small part of supporting Indigenous communities. It is our hope that our land acknowledgement statement will inspire others to stand in solidarity with Native nations and to amplify the voices of Indigenous people leading grassroots change movements. So we are here in a very, very sacred and special place. We begin our Sunday morning sessions usually with the chant, the 4 quarters chant, which I believe is on page 30 in your chant books. And the children are here today, and they will come in at the end and actually sing with us, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Let us now make the 4 boundless qualities shine forth. I will abide, pervading one quarter, with a mind imbued with loving kindness. Likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself, I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. I will abide, pervading one quarter, with a mind imbued with compassion. Likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself, I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with compassion, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. I will abide, pervading one quarter, with a mind imbued with gladness, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself, I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with gladness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. I will abide, pervading one quarter, with a mind imbued with equanimity, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth, so above and below, around and everywhere, and to all as to myself, I will abide, pervading the all-encompassing world, with a mind imbued with equanimity, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. So as we begin our formal sitting practice, I just invite you to bring your whole self into the room. Bring all the parts of who you are right here, right now. Not just the good meditator, but all those parts of who we are. Welcome everything. And as we begin our formal practice, you might just reflect for a moment on your motivation, on your intention, and let that intention be imbued with a sense of appreciation that you are here in the Zoom room or here in our physical space right now. Just appreciating that you were able to follow through with that intention to show up today. And our practice of mindfulness is a practice of being present to what is actually here in this moment. as best we can without judgment. And if judgment shows up, we just notice, okay, there's judgment. A lot of times in practice, in our formal practice, we have some sort of goal. We have some sort of fixed idea of what a good meditation is. And I would encourage you, as best you can, to let go of those fixed ideas, to let go of striving and achieving. Meditation is not the breath Olympics. So I just encourage you to sit with a kindly, open awareness, being present to the sensations of the body, perhaps the emotions, the mind. Being willing to be aware. And if you find that the breath is a support for your practice, please feel free to use that. But don't grab onto it. Sometimes with an in-breath, I will just note accepting, and with the out-breath, letting go. And that's really what a lot of our practice is. Accepting how the body is, how the mind is. And accepting it and letting go with a sense of kindness, of care, of true concern for our own welfare and the welfare of others. So this practice isn't about achieving some rarefied state. It's a practice of wholeheartedly embracing the present moment, however that is. And with that, we will sit in silence. And for the last 2 minutes of our practice, I would just invite you to see if in this present moment there is any fragrance, any flavor of gratitude or appreciation. Sometimes it's there and we just don't notice it. So please take a moment to stretch, stand up if you need to. If you're in the Zoom room, you might want to look away from your screen for a few minutes and say, if you're in the room, you might say hello to someone you haven't said hello to before. Well, thank you everyone for being here today in the Zoom room or here in person. What I'd like to talk about today is patience and impatience, their causes and conditions. And I am probably not the only one in this physical space or in the Zoom room who regularly falls short in their aspiration to practice patience. And the first thing, so I've become really curious about it. And I'm trying to think about what are the causes and the conditions that help me to be patient, and what are the causes and conditions where I am completely impatient. And the first thing to notice, to consider, is patience is not waiting. Patience is not just waiting for something to happen. That understanding of patience really trivializes it. And I remember in the 70s reading a poem that I could not find for this talk. I tried to several times to see if I could find it, but it was a long poem, and it was about a woman's life that was just, I am waiting, I am waiting, I am waiting. And all the sorts of things that went on for page after page after page, from her childhood through her very last years. And it was just this whole litany of spending a life waiting. And patience is not about waiting. In the classical Buddhist texts, the Pali word for patience is khanti, Khanti, and it is considered one of the 10 perfections of the heart. And in the Dhammapada, which is an early Buddhist text, it is said that patient endurance is the supreme austerity. Sometimes that gets translated as the highest virtue, but I think the translation, the supreme austerity, is really interesting for our purposes, because it was in a monastic community where there were, one of the things that characterized the early Buddhist monastic community is that there were people from very, very different walks of life, very, very different situations, experiences, and they all had to live together. And there were just numerous instances recorded when people had, monks especially, had disputes about how something was to be done. So if you ever look at the Vinaya, the Code of Monastic Rules, and you can Google it and you can find it through Access to Insight, there are just rule after rule after rule that is just made, like what we do with our dishes, actually how to urinate, how to defecate, how to clean up this stuff. It's all about how people can live together in harmony. And there were rules too in the monastic community about seniority that were sometimes pretty vexing to people who had to defer to the seniority of people that they thought maybe were less accomplished than they were. So it's all about living in harmony, the supreme austerity. In early Buddhism, it involved not only this sort of enduring a difficult situation, but it is particularly imbued with the idea of not retaliating and not harming. The early Buddhist concept of patience is really all about non-harming, absolutely crucial. So patience would include perseverance in the face of delay, tolerance of provocation without responding with disrespect or anger, forbearance when under strain, especially when facing long-term difficulties, and developing the habit of abiding. Patience is about a kind of, I believe, a kind-hearted abiding, and abiding with that intention not to harm. And the insight of practicing patience is a deepening of the understanding of karma, that situations arise according to cause and effect, and seeing really clearly how things arise and pass away. That we really understand, oh, this happened because this happened. This is what led to this. And we can really use that as a way of deepening our own understanding. And there's a wonderful little poem in this lovely book called The First Free Women. And they are interpretations and adaptations of some of the poems of the first Buddhist nuns. They're not literally translations, but they are adaptations. And this is there's one for a nun whose name was Bhadra. And the poem is, "You always considered yourself lucky because things seemed to work out the way you wanted. Now luck has a different meaning. Lucky to be walking a path that finds peace in the arising and passing away of each present moment, regardless of how things work out or don't." I'll read it again. You always, excuse me, you always considered yourself lucky because things seemed to work out the way you wanted. Now luck has a different meaning. Lucky to be walking a path that finds peace in the arising and passing away of each present moment, regardless of how things work out or don't. So the question is how do we take these beautiful ancient teachings and apply them to our lives, which are very different than the lives of the early Buddhist practitioners. I was listening to the radio a couple of this past week, and it said, and I don't remember the source, I apologize for that, but it said, the rapid pace of technology is rewiring humans to be less patient. The rapid pace of technology is rewiring us to be less patient. And I was telling Tim about what a Luddite well, not Luddite, probably troglodyte I am around a lot of technology. And I don't have a Mac, and I still use a mouse instead of the little pad. And I was saying, no, I remember when we used to dial up for the internet, and there was that little kind of sound that it made, and you just sort of waited for your connection, and daisy wheel printers, things to and things used to just take a lot more time. And now I just notice if something doesn't come up quickly, I am so likely to just leave it and go on to something else. I just noticed that how much my own expectations have changed. So our technology is teaching us to be to expect a kind of instant gratification, and to really, when I heard this, I thought, that really, the causes and conditions, I'm being conditioned to want things right away, to expect things right away, to feel that I have been somehow treated unfairly if it doesn't happen right away. And I think it was in the same context of talking about this that the presenter, whoever the unnamed presenter was, talked about an experiment with two different kinds of monkeys, tamarins and cotton tops. And it was about whether they could sort of delay gratification to get what they wanted. And it turned out that the tamarins could not, but the cotton tops could. And one of the hypotheses about this was that the tamarins are insect eaters, and they have to respond really, really quickly to things. And the cotton tops are foraging monkeys. And they said that if you are a forager, your conditioning is actually to able to be more patient. So we can just reflect on that and about what our own sort of conditioning is, whether we're willing to be patient, and or whether we do things instantly. And so first I'm going to talk about patience and impatience in our interactions with others, and then more about what happens when we're working with ourselves. So one of the greatest lessons I had in patience was right before the pandemic with a dog I adopted. And we have another dog, and we for a long time had three dogs, two older dogs and this younger dog. And the older dogs died, and the younger dog, who was 5 at the time, just tore up magazines, tore up towels, bit me. He was just months after the last older dog died. And so we brought in someone who was an animal communicator, and the dog that remained, his name is Benny, and he is a thoroughly entitled little Shih Tzu mix. His DNA says he has a little Samoyed, which might take the two stubbornest breeds, and you have Benny. And so we talked about what happened, and this wonderful person said he has a lot of trouble managing his emotions. She said he just doesn't do well. And And so I said, well, there was that day he bit me, and she got very quiet. I said, "Do you remember that day?" She said, "He remembers that day. He was having a really bad day, and he's not sorry." But she said, what would probably be the best thing we could do was to bring another dog into the household. And she said, maybe a female about his age. And I also want to say that I read years ago that, a great therapist is someone who can help you, has to be both a poet and a detective, someone who can help you make sense of the past in a way, come up with a narrative about the past that lets you move on to the future. And I thought, whether or not anyone, I'm trained in philosophy, I'm genuinely skeptical, but I thought, okay, this sort of gives us a narrative that we can take and move on to the future. She did her job. So we adopted this dog who was 6 years old, and her name, ironically named Storm, because I was terrified of storms. And she's a miniature Australian Shepherd. And she was in foster care for a couple of months. But she had been a puppy mom down in Texas, living in a cage, having litter after litter after litter. And, so she came to us in a way. She was really traumatized, and she could only be adopted by a family that already had a dog. So they thought she needed another dog. But she spent the first month and a half hiding in the basement. She could squeeze behind the washer. She was just terrified of everything. And it was just this very, very long period. Then we tried to keep her in our bedroom. She would hide behind the printer. She chewed the spines off a bunch of my Dharma books. It just, she was so unused to people in so many ways. And I really wanted a dog that I could walk with, because Benny is a wanderer, a meanderer, a stop at anything that is in any sense vertical to the ground. And so I really wanted a dog that I could walk. And I put Storm on a leash, and we'd go outside, and we'd get to the end of the block, and she would just pancake, just throw herself down, and she wouldn't go any further. It was like there was an electric fence. And this went on, like, we got her in February. This went on well into September. And I just thought, okay, so this dog may never be a walker. This may be all I can expect from her. But what was so, and I thought, why is it that I just have so much patience with this dog that, this was not the dog I imagined I would get. Why is it that I can just have so much patience with her, chewing up my books with her, just being so traumatized? And it was because she was traumatized. And I realized that it was possible, because I kept thinking, why am I not this way with, the other people in my household? Only this dog, not even with Benny, right? Why is it with this dog? And I realized that compassion was the foundation of patience, that I could have, infinite compassion with this dog. And, and it was because I had so much compassion, thinking about her years living in a cage, being a puppy mom. And I just thought, why can't I do that with people? And I really tried at that point to really see if I could, instead of making snap judgments about people, or judgments about my own family members, why don't I try to have more compassion and just think of, if you can do it with Storm, why can't you do it with your family, with other people? And it was just a great lesson, because I was really puzzled that I had all this patience, but only with the dog. And I'm happy to say that she has come many, this was like in 2020, she has made amazing strides. We do go for walks, although she will always be a hyper vigilant, very shy dog. And She often does not want to go places that we haven't been before. But she's made just enormous strides. So there's a really happy ending to this. And I think the other happy part of this is that I really learned something important about patience. That if we can come back to our foundation of kindness, if we can come back to our foundation of goodwill, of compassion, that really supports the practice of patience. Pema Chodron, who is a wonderful writer, Buddhist nun, abbess of a Tibetan monastery of nuns in Nova Scotia. Pema talks about some of her practices for patience. And she says, when she's stuck in traffic, she just reminds herself, everyone else here, just like me, is stuck in traffic. Nobody really wants to be stuck in traffic. We all have that in common. Here we are, all of us stuck in traffic. And she just has this sense of relating to everyone else who is stuck in traffic at that moment, this kind of just like me practice. So just like me, everyone has days when they are really irritable. So we work with other people, sometimes you encounter someone and they are really, really irritable. And one thing is that this person may be having a really bad day, like Benny, the dog. But that there's some people are having the worst day of their lives. And Brian Stevenson, the wonderful founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, says, no one should be judged by what they did on the worst day of their lives. No one should be reduced to what they did on the worst day of their lives. And I think that's a really profound teaching. So when we encounter the really difficult people, just to remember that no one should be judged, reduced to what they did on the worst day of their lives. And a lot of times people are having a really bad day and you don't know what it's about. They may have lost a job. They may have someone in their lives who's very sick. You just don't know. And if we can hold that as a kind of framework when we encounter people, it just makes life easier. So we don't take it personally when someone is rude or irritable. It's not personal. They're just having a really bad day. I mean, they may have lots and lots of bad days. It may be their habit to have bad days, but it's not to take it personally, and to remember this idea about patience and not harming. That our deep intention is not to harm. I love it when I go to a bank or there's a cashier, or a bank teller, or service provider who spends a lot of time with the person in front of me. I still do. I like to bank in person. So I go and someone is helping someone in front of me who's having, maybe language difficulties, not understanding things. They don't understand why there's no money in the account. There are lots of times when people are in these sort of lines, we just see them and they're really struggling with something. And I just love it when the bank teller or the cashier or the service provider just spends all this time really helping that person, not wanting to get rid of that person, just really being there completely to try to help the person understand what the situation is, how they could resolve it. And and I just and usually when it's my turn, the person will say, thank you for being so patient. I say, no, but I think you just did was wonderful. Thank you so much for really taking the time to address that person's needs. It was so great that you were able to really help them out. And they really appreciate it, because a lot of times, people are just impatient, or they'll say something like, why do I always get on the wrong line? That sort of attitude. But, this only works. This only works if we are not rushing. And, rushing is probably the fuel for impatience more than anything else in our lives. You know, this is that idea that because when we're rushing, we're in a physiologically agitated state, and it makes it really difficult to have the presence of mind, the mindfulness that supports our ability to be with things as they are. And depletion or exhaustion is the other, kind of the flip side of rushing, which also makes it really difficult. We're physiologically running on fumes, and that makes it really difficult to respond with patient attention. And sometimes, this, you know, we can arrange the conditions so that we're not rushing, and to see if we always rush. Now, there was a time in my life where I would schedule myself so that I could do all these things. If I didn't run into any lights, all the lights were green, and I got the parking space closest to the door, then it would work out, which is just nuts. But you know, that was kind of my habit, to like see how much I could squeeze in, and it's a really bad habit, and I had to see it rushing as a really bad habit. And for many of us, this sort of exhaustion is a really bad habit. We set up the causes and conditions for our own defeat. And also, there are times when the causes and conditions for rushing or for being exhausted are out of our hands. Our situation is such, you've got kids, you've got people, you know, a lot of times it's just out of our hands. And that's when we really have to have a lot of compassion and patience for ourselves, and not to blame ourselves. So we have to be discerning and see, okay, so when is it that I sort of set myself up for being impatient by the way I scheduled this or did it, or stayed up, you know, binged on Netflix and am just out the next day. But other times when it's not, you know, the causes and conditions again are outside our own circumstances, that we really regard ourselves and we forgive ourselves for our impatience. And we practice a lot of compassion because it's not our intention to be impatient. So the Buddha has a teaching that I think is useful when we contemplate patience and try to develop patience. And the teaching is often referred to as the 4 great exertions, or the 4 right exertions, which sound really formidable. But the British Dharma teacher, Nathan Glyde, who teaches out of Gaia House in England, says instead, he calls them the happiness trainings instead of the 4 great exertions, which I think is a really nice reframing. And the practices are, first of all, as best we can, preventing mind states that are not wholesome and beneficial. We work to prevent those states arising. So we maybe might avoid certain people, certain places, certain circumstances, because we know we'll just be really in a bad mood if we encounter them. And as best we can, we abandon those states of mind that are not wholesome and beneficial. We can see if we can let something go. And of course, then there is cultivating those mind states that are wholesome and beneficial, and sustaining the mind states that are wholesome and beneficial. So it's kind of the model of the garden, about what seeds you're going to plant, what you're going to nurture. But it's often really useful at the beginning of the day, if you're practicing, to just kind of reflect on not feeding what is unwholesome, not feeding what is not beneficial, and really cultivating and doing that, of having compassion for yourself, of cultivating an attitude of kindliness toward yourself. That, you know, if you're just endlessly castigating yourself, that is not a wholesome mind state. That's sort of constant criticism, that sort of constant berating ourselves. And sometimes it's berating ourselves because we don't have patience, because this didn't turn out the way we wanted. And those are really unwholesome states. Instead of having compassion and maybe reflecting on whether or not things could be done differently, you know, we can have this intention to keep this framework in mind, and this framework of being non-reactive. I mean, one of the understandings of patience is it's not being reactive. Patience allows us to respond in a way that's in alignment with our deepest values. And of course, one of those is non-harming. So patience is it's not just waiting. It's really about abiding in a kind of non-reactive place where we can think about what is the most skillful response in this moment. It's really life-giving. Patience can be such a soothing practice. And it is a practice. It's not something that we can just have by wanting it. It really is a practice. And to be able to support ourselves in developing this as a practice. So I have a poem in here about a lovely poem. This is the poem of Dantica. And this is maybe something that will resonate. She says, while walking along the river after a long day meditating on Vulture Peak, and Vulture Peak is actually a place in India where the Buddha taught. So it's an actual place. While walking along the river after a long day meditating on Vulture Peak, I watched an elephant splashing its way out of the water and up the bank. Hello, my friend, a man waiting there said, scratching the elephant behind its ear. Did you have a good bath? The elephant stretched out its leg. The man climbed up. The two rode off like that, together. Seeing what had once been so wild, now a friend and companion to this good man, I took a seat under the nearest tree and reached out a gentle hand to my own mind. Truly, I thought, this is why I came to the woods. I'll read it again. While walking along the river, after a long day meditating on Vulture Peak, I watched an elephant splashing its way out of the water and up the bank. Hello, my friend, a man waiting there said, scratching the elephant behind its ear. Did you have a good bath? The elephant stretched out its leg, the man climbed up, and the two rode off like that together. Seeing what had once been so wild, now a friend and companion to this good man, I took a seat under the nearest tree and reached out a gentle hand to my own mind. Truly, I thought, this is why I came to the woods. And I love this idea about stretching out a gentle hand to our own mind and having the confidence that we can work with things how they are without a lot of striving. That developing patience, developing this receptive capacity, this capacity of abiding rather than gaining, this capacity to relate to others and to relate to ourselves in this way that is completely imbued with non-harming. So I hope this was useful to you, and I thank you for your kind attention. The children will be here. Yes.
Did Storm help any?
That's a good question. Did Storm help Benny? They are not bosom buddies, but they realize that each one benefits from the other's presence. So often if we're going a new place, I always try to make sure that we're going with Benny and my spouse, Dan, and Storm will kind of pancake, and I will say, oh, Storm, let's just go with Dan and Benny. Let's just do that. We can go with Dan and Benny. And they're kind of trotting on ahead. She'll get up and she'll try it out. So they benefit from each other. He has never harmed her, never humped her, which is a good thing. But our animals and our children, all, and our spouses, teach us so much about patience. It is, I mean, for one thing, I think about toddlers when they are completely out of control and they're miserable. I mean, that this little kid who can't control his or her emotions, their emotions at all, we just see how miserable they are. And we just have so much compassion. Since the kids are not here yet, I can tell you that at one time, almost 2 decades ago, I spent some time in Romania with my mother-in-law, who, my late deceased wonderful mother-in-law, who volunteered in Romania in a center for children who had been given up by their parents, mostly because they couldn't afford to feed them. And so it was a failure to thrive clinic. And it was a place where the only food the kids got were blended carrots and milk. That was it. Kids only used bottles. I mean, even some of them were 3 years old. They still didn't know how to eat with a spoon. And they were like puppies. They never got enough to eat. So when they would hear the aides coming down the corridor with the bottles, they would truly be like puppies just scratching at the door. And kids are here, so I'll make this quick. And, it was just heartbreaking. I'd never been around children who were hungry all the time. And the kids would have just meltdowns, and they would be, just screaming, banging their heads on stuff. And the only thing to do was to pick them up and take them outside and just hold them as best you could. I mean, it was just such a lesson in suffering. I thought this is true suffering. These kids who are just little and out of control and hungry. And how could you not respond with compassion? But it was one of, and patience. And so, those are the sorts of things I think that really wake us up. And just to have that kind of kindness. And when we meet adults who are out of control and just over the top, we can have that same kind of compassion that we would have for a toddler or a dog. We can do it with adults too. So thank you all very much. And come on in, kids. I'll open the door for the kids. The kids are going to come, the children are going to come in and sing and be with us.